What up, people? How is it going? All right, we're back. We're back with another stream. Hope all of you guys are having a wonderful Monday. Hope everyone's doing great. Just kicking off the stream now. We got 2 viewers right now. Nobody's really chatting yet. But yeah, feels good. Feel good to be back. Excited to stream and answer whatever questions you guys have. But if nobody joins, I will discuss some things of my own, because I have different things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and this is kind of what these streams are meant to do, is just give me a chance to sort of talk about things. So I hope you all are doing very well. I'm going to be traveling coming up pretty soon, so yeah, getting ready for that. That should be fun. Very exciting times in my life right now. Hope all of your guys' lives are doing just as incredible. So I guess just to kind of start talking about things, you guys, so people would have seen my video last week. If you've been following the channel, you would have seen my video last week on the Sacraments, on the Lord's Supper. And actually, I'm really impressed at how the clips from that video are doing. YouTube has an interesting way of promoting shorts. I feel like shorts are like the new super popular thing, just with TikTok, I guess. And kind of jumping into that scene has garnered a lot of views for my channel. But for whatever reason, it didn't really increase the views on the long form content. However, in this case, the shorts seemed to help with the video itself a little bit, which was nice, which is kind of the goal of doing those shorts in general. So yeah, I feel good about that. But yeah, so I mean, the main point that I was talking about in that video was about the Lord's Supper, about kind of the Reformed view or the Lutheran view, like the views that come from Protestants in the Protestant Reformation. So my views would probably align more with like Lutherans or Calvinists or Anglicans, and I feel like that strain of thought that kind of treats the Lord's Supper in a sort of sense of it's like the body and blood are there, like the real presence of Jesus is within the elements, but they still remain bread and wine. I think that makes the most sense. It aligns with the incarnation, which I think really has this beautiful sense of aligning our sacramentology with our Christology. And I think it aligns more with like a common sense approach too, and a sort of sacramental union. Whereas transubstantiation, I don't feel like does that. And like, I think the, what's the word? I think even the because I've been reading through the Westminster Confession lately and looking at like the different parts of it. So let me pull up the section on the Lord's Supper. So I think this part of it is particularly interesting, where it basically like talks about transubstantiation. So the line is that doctrine which maintains a change of the substance of bread and wine into the substance of Christ's body and blood, commonly called transubstantiation, by consecration of a priest or by any other way, is repugnant, not to Scripture alone, but even to common sense and reason, overthroweth the nature of the sacrament, and hath been and is the cause of manifold superstitions, yea, of gross idolatries. So this idea of Christ, of the bread and wine ceasing to be, that I think it's interesting that it points out that it's even to common sense and reason that transubstantiation violates our understanding of what the Lord's Supper is. And I remember when I was Catholic, one like big issue for me when I was kind of deconverting or deconstructing away from the faith when I became an atheist during college was just that instance of the Lord's Supper, this sort of oh, am I quiet? Here, let me turn myself up a little bit or move my mic closer to myself. Sorry. Let me... But hey, how's it going, Josh? How are you? Hope you are doing well. Let me get my settings up and make sure that my sound sounds okay. Let me... Oh, weird. What the heck? The volume of my microphone is at, like, max level, so maybe I just need to get, like, closer to the microphone. I realize that my microphone itself tends to be very quiet. People have pointed that out before. But yeah. Okay. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if that helps a little bit. Okay. Yeah, hopefully we're good now. Hopefully you guys can all hear me. Passed the finals. Now taking a mental break. Told my wife to get me a list of house things that need done. Nice, makes sense. Yeah, it's that makes sense. Yeah, it's nice to take a little break from things, and although sometimes I find when I'm just sitting like around the house and stuff like that, I do need a list of things to do sometimes because, I mean, yeah. So yeah, good thing to ask to help with stuff, because sometimes when I'm just sitting at home, I really need to. I feel like that's just the type of person that I am, is someone who just needs to like be doing something. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just in a state of just stagnation. Like even when I'm like by myself, like when my girlfriend was or when like my girlfriend was on a trip for the weekend, so I couldn't hang out with her, I would just stay home and like write videos and come up with ideas. Like that's when I wrote my video on the Lord's Supper and stuff like that. But yeah, but kind of back to the point we were talking about, with regards to the Lord's Supper, and during the time when like I was becoming an atheist, kind of deconstructing from my Catholic faith, that was a huge issue for me. Like a huge stumbling block for me was the doctrine of transubstantiation. They would like present the Eucharist, present the wine, and at one point, like during my process of deconverting, I just looked at it and realized like this is bread. Like if you looked at this under a microscope, you could look at it in every sense. It is bread. Now, I would say that the real presence of Christ is there, and it enters there through the consecration. But it's against reason itself, against like our own rationality, to assume that is no longer in substance is no longer in substance bread and wine. Let me see if my... Dang, what the heck? Yeah, that's so weird that the microphone is so quiet. Because it's up to like the max on everything, which is weird. But now then the real question for me about the Lord's Supper comes when you start asking the question of what does it mean for Christ to be truly present within the elements? Is something like mystical happening there where Christ becomes present, physically present, like the real presence in the body and blood? But yeah, it only looks like bread is definitely one of the more wild aspects of Rome's doctrines. Yeah, and as I was mentioning before, is the like just this point alone in the Westminster Confession is like it just hits it so. It hits that point so hard. Like even to common sense and reason, overthrow the nature of the sacrament. Even to common, it's like repugnant even to common sense and reason. It's not just unbiblical. It's like literally, now not everything that happens has to make sense with our reason and our minds, but something that is this like strange and so absurd, it seems like that is taking it a stretch too far. And the defense of this by pointing at John 6 and just saying, "Oh, it was shocking to the disciples." I don't think that gives you license to go so overboard in a way that even Paul doesn't do when he describes it as when he still describes it as eating bread and when he still describes it as eating bread. Now it's in the part where he says that by eating bread you're sinning against. Let's find that passage actually. Is it 1 Corinthians 11, right? I might be wrong. Yeah. So this seems to like really clearly point to a real presence view against transubstantiation, as I was talking about in my video. Like he still describes it, even after like describing the consecration, he still describes it as eating bread. So I mean that's one thing. But I guess sort of the thing that I've been starting to think about more is which type of real presence I agree with more. I feel like from the way that I've talked about things in my last video, my views seem to align more with my understanding of what the Lutheran view is, that he is like the body and blood are like carnally present in a certain sense, whereas Calvin would say that they're just spiritually present. Like you can see here in the Westminster Confession, that we indeed, yet not carnally and corporally, but spiritually, feed upon Christ crucified. So he's affirming real presence here, but it's not in the same sense that I think a Lutheran would, in the sense that I think a Lutheran would affirm more that Christ's body is carnally and corporally present in the sort of sacramental union. That, at least that's my current understanding of the Lutheran view. I guess I don't know what the Methodist view is. I think the Methodist view, from my understanding, is similar to Calvin's view on this. I'm not entirely sure though. The Methodism's official view is spiritual presence, though of course it's called real presence. But I do think the Lutheran view is very solid. Yeah, okay, I agree. I think I think spiritual presence would align closely with Calvin's views. I don't know if there's a big distinction between those. Let me look that up. Calvin's view of Lord's Supper versus Lutheran view, or not Lutheran view versus Methodist view. Okay. They differ in their understanding of Christ's presence and the nature of the spiritual benefit. Calvinists believe in the spiritual presence of Christ, emphasizing that we receive... Sorry, let me actually share my screen again. Methodist view is basically a simplified version of the Anglican articles, though in America, Methodists are heavily influenced by Baptist theology. Yeah, I do notice that even like in our specific doctrines of... like even in like the church that I go to, sometimes like depending on the pastor that you talk to, the view can seem more memorialist or more similar to a Lutheran view. So there's definitely a lot of influence from it, even though I mean the idea. So here, like maybe this would be why, like what a Lutheran would critique and say that claiming that it's only spiritually that we receive Christ is what leads to like more spiritual real presence views starting to devolve into these sort of Baptist memorialist views. Although even my understanding is even Baptists don't, I think traditionally Baptists do affirm The Real Presence, I think. Majority view it as bread and wine are symbolic and not a literal transformation of Christ's body and blood. Yeah. Oh yeah, I've heard that from Gavin Orland, that it's the prevailing Baptist view. Baptist Real Presence. Is a purely symbolic, a more traditional historic view within Baptist theology. Oh yeah, so they're like they're pointing to the Gavin Orland video, which is interesting. But yeah, so even in like a lot of Presbyterian churches, these like people might lean more into memorialist views, like especially in the congregations. In the congregations, you find almost everything. Like we have, I guess just being in Southern California, there's a huge proportion of just evangelicals and these mega churches. Like they're all over the place. There's like all these like rectangular buildings, and then they have their stage in there, and they have their little non-denominational services and stuff like that. So that's all over. And if you ask the average person in my area or neighborhood, or like at work, like if people ever talk about church, like I'll hear people going to like one of these non-denominational sort of mega churches. So the influence is huge, and even the people that I see at the Presbyterian church that I go to, they all are, well, a lot of them are coming from one of these more like non-denominational evangelical sort of churches. So there's definitely a huge influence of that there. And I think we can see some of like the worship style definitely like enters into that, like especially with some of like the modern services and the classical services and those distinctions, which I see a lot of in Presbyterian churches around me, which is actually part of why me and my girlfriend can agree on a church, because we found that Presbyterianism, it has like, she really enjoys like the more modern style of worship, whereas I am very used to growing up Catholic. It almost feels irreverent to me, and I want like a connection, I'm fine like sacrificing that a little bit, but I still want some connection to a tradition, like a solid Protestant tradition. And at the current moment, I would probably be fine with anything like Lutheranism or Methodism or Presbyterianism or even Anglicanism. So I find that the Presbyterian churches around me tend to hit that balance pretty well, where I can get the things that I need and she can also get the things that she needs out of it. So I think that does a good job, and I think that's important as well. I think it's good to not go in very different directions theologically from your partner, so you can go to church together, attend events together. And I've really enjoyed that type of thing. And I think if I ever did go to a non-denominational church, it would probably be because of her and just stay with her. But I don't think I could sacrifice that. I think there's some point in which you need to like have certain minimum standards. I think that's very important when determining churches, because that's your own theological path and spiritual path and all that stuff. And I think that very much does matter. Yeah. And I think it's important with the Lord's Supper, I think it is important to find something that does support a view that comes from the apostles directly, rather than some innovation later on. Like, I want my faith to be rooted in history and rooted in the apostles, and I think that sort of transcending our own cultural biases and cultural predispositions, I think that is what really finding the right denomination is about. It's about finding something that can connect you to just the history of Christians and can connect you to historical views. And I think that's very important. I don't know. I think that is important. Whereas I think sometimes American evangelicalism can get very like caught up in our own sort of cultural paradigm and our own sort of views of what Christianity is in this particular culture, in this particular age as well. Like the way, for example, that dispensationalists might align the modern day nation of Israel with Israel that's mentioned in the Bible. It's like very influenced by our present state. Like when people read Israel in the Bible, they think of Israel the nation rather than like this very like what Israel was meant to represent in Revelation in the Bible, which refers to the whole church, refers to all people, because I mean Jesus extended his covenant, or Jesus extended the covenant between God and Israel to all of humanity, where I think that's like the whole line of there's neither Jew nor Greek or Jew nor Gentile, or whatever the specific line is. Let me find the actual verse. Yeah, neither Jew nor Greek in Galatians 3:28. I wonder if there's like a good verse that specifically explicates like the nation of Israel being expanded to the world. Yeah, I think sometimes we can get very caught up in our sort of cultural paradigms, and I think that can be problematic. I also think like the sort of view that kind of removes all possibility for the supernatural occurring, like in these sort of what's the word, cessationist views. I think those views also have certain issues, and they're very plagued by a very modern view that like supernatural things can't happen, and that the supernatural is impossible, which I think is ultimately from this materialistic worldview that we have so much adopted in the West. But yeah, so I guess the one thing to talk about, I've been reading a lot of or not a lot yet. I started reading through some of the Westminster Confession, and particularly been looking at stuff on the Sacraments. I also started talking with my little brother a little bit about infant baptism, because both of us were baptized Catholics, and he's been going to more of a non-denominational church that would not affirm infant baptism. So in his mind, the question is, or for him, the question is that he's currently being faced with is, does he get rebaptized or not? Like, was his original baptism valid? Now, under a Presbyterian view, I actually really like the Calvinist view on baptism. I think the way that it ties back to circumcision and sort of frames baptism as the sign and seal of the new covenant, that God's covenant with humanity is, or God's expansion of his covenant to all of humanity, baptism as sort of this initiation into that covenant, I think is really good. And I think sometimes this idea that we need to believe before we have baptism, it really makes baptism less of a work of ourselves or of God and more of our own personal works. And now they don't believe that baptism saves, but baptism becomes, rather than this work of God bestowing grace and a sign and seal of the covenant of grace bestowed onto us, it turns from that, it turns from God's action from that into just me doing some performance because I believe and I was born again. So now I'm doing this performative act of obedience, which is weird. And I think it takes the focus off of, off of God in that act. Let me see if I can find some of what we talked about, because I think a lot of times people will sometimes act like, or I guess the point that was made that he brought up was that like people were baptized after they believe all throughout Acts, but the issue is I think it ignores just the fact that like they were baptizing households. In Acts 16, there's within that chapter alone, there's 2 events of people converting and then their whole families are being baptized, because these infants, once they're by being raised in a Christian household, they're being entered into that covenant. They're being entered into that covenant of grace through the faith of the parents, through the parents' faith and through their commitment to raise these children as Christians. And I think that is why that baptism is still efficacious. Now, what exactly baptism does, I think both Calvin and Luther affirm that baptism saves, but I think that the way in which it saves is a little bit different. And I've talked with people about this, and it's hard for me to understand what exactly they're saying, because there's people there's Presbyterians who would not say baptism saves because they don't want to affirm baptismal regeneration. But there is still like some sense in which it does save, even in the Presbyterian view. It's very much connected to our salvation, because Christ commands that when we have faith, we should get baptized. We should be born again through water and through the Spirit. But yeah, and then the point also of just the efficacy of baptism. So in the Westminster Confession, the point that it makes is that the efficacy of baptism is not tied to the moment wherein it is administered, yet notwithstanding by the right use of this ordinance, this grace promise is not only offered, but really exhibited and conferred by the Holy Ghost to such, whether of age or infants, as that grace belongeth to, according to the counsel of God's own will, in his appointed time. So, the point here is simply, I think that, at the very end, the point is that the efficacy of baptism, like, you can give that to infants, but it's not, even when the faith is not there. I'm interested in seeing what verses are cited for this. Where is this taking me? Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born of water and spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. Let's see what 8 says. Actually, I should just read them out from here. The wind bloweth where it listen. Oh gosh, I need a better translation. I'm not gonna read the King James. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Oh, I see. Okay, so that's interesting. So the timing of it, we can't really control the efficacy of the Spirit, I think is kind of the point they're making here. So you don't necessarily know whether that Spirit's efficacy comes at in the moment of baptism or later on in life, because the baptism is sort of tied to this internal faith, which is ultimately what saves. But it's not tied to that exact moment in time. And the efficacy, I guess, in the Calvinist view is that it only is efficacious for those who do ultimately come to a sort of saving faith. But let's see what their definition of baptism is. So baptism is a sacrament of the New Testament ordained by Jesus Christ. So that's Matthew 28. Baptizing them, go therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Not only for the solemn admission of the party baptized into the visible church, but also to be unto him a sign and seal of the covenant of grace, of his ingrafting into Christ, of regeneration, of remission of sins, and of his giving up unto God through Jesus Christ to walk in newness of life, which sacrament is by God's own appointment to be continued in his church until the end of the world. Baptized into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, that expansion beyond the nation of Israel into everyone in the world, in the visible church. Romans 4:11, and he received the sign of circumcision, the seal of righteousness of faith, which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also. Okay. So it's like this expansion beyond circumcision. You need both. So circumcision is kind of the sign and seal. Circumcision is described here as the sign and seal of righteousness of faith, which he had yet being uncircumcised. So you had this righteousness of faith, even when you were uncircumcised, which still passes on that righteousness to you. In whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, and putting off the body of sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, buried with him in baptism, wherein also ye are risen with him through the faith of operation of God. See, that sometimes I struggle with the King James Version, because stuff is just, it's difficult to read it on a first pass and fully understand what exactly is being said. But what I do know, like these verses, this is like where Paul explains basically that baptism is sort of this replacement of circumcision, and he makes that connection between baptism and circumcision as these signs and seals of the covenant that we have with God. And if we sort of view it in the Calvinist sense of, like, this is one continual covenant that originally God made with the family, and then it expanded out. Like, he originally made it with Abraham, or I guess, what's the order of the covenants? Sorry. Because the first one was Abraham, right? And then it just expands out into different, covenant of works. So I guess it started with even just a covenant with Adam, and eventually just gets expanded until when he made his covenant with Abraham, it was like a promise to the nation of Israel, and then that getting sort of expanded, I guess, and as well with the Mosaic covenant. So it just continues expanding into, like, I remember even when I was Catholic, we had this sort of I remember seeing a diagram of just like the expansion for where it starts off making a covenant with the individual, expanding to, I guess, Noah, and then expanding to Abraham, which was a nation. I guess Noah would have been the family, Abraham the nation, or Moses might have been the nation. Abraham was probably the family. I forget the specific ones that they said. So I'm always blanking on the specifics. And also, just so you know, like I'm always still, I'm very much still learning this stuff. So like I have some general idea of certain things and the expansion, but sometimes the way that I find that when I try to explain something and speak it into the world, it can never come out exactly the way that I understand it. But I think that's kind of the point of making a YouTube channel, and for me at least, the point of making a YouTube channel being so that I can work on trying to explain these things and understand these things better. And I guess that's kind of what you get with these live streams, especially since my channel is pretty small right now, and we're still kind of trying to develop a stronger viewer base. It's not going to be necessarily a Q&A right now. It's just me kind of talking and rambling about whatever I feel is interesting, which if you guys enjoy that, I really do hope you do. But yeah, I'm definitely still learning, and I do hope to be similar to what Redeemed Zoomer would say, like a gateway drug into like Christianity, into theology, stuff like that. And because he was kind of a gateway drug for me into that sort of stuff, where I remember watching some of his videos, just like learning about what these other denominations even were was kind of interesting. And that led me to like start diving deeper into people like Gavin Ortland or Jordan Cooper or like other people. I guess I also tend to watch a lot of Catholic YouTubers, because I feel like the Catholic YouTubers tend to be highly recommended by people. But it's interesting that as I grow deeper in my faith and continue reading the Bible more and more and looking into church history and seeing stuff like that, I find that the Catholic arguments seem to be less and less and less compelling over time. I guess I'll change it back to my face. But I recently watched this Joe Heschmeyer video where he was talking about like asking the question of like who was the first pope, and then his articulation of that, it just didn't seem very strong. Like the case that he was trying to make and the critique that he was leveling against Protestants just didn't seem very strong, because he was asking this question, well, if Peter's not the first pope, then who is? Who is the first pope? Do you think that it's some guy around the time of Constantine? Do you think it was after Vatican I? You need to, if you don't think Peter's the first pope, then who do you think that the first pope is? And I think that if you trace it, you can trace back, theoretically, like this pope to Peter. But the idea of what a pope is, I think, or similar to how Gavin Ortland would argue this, what a pope actually is, the doctrine of the papacy is an accretion. It's a development. It was this development over time. In the beginning of this time, like Peter was not viewed as this like infallible head of the church with universal jurisdiction over all dioceses of the church. That's something that was accreted over time. And ultimately, as the Pope, as the Bishop of Rome began to seize power more and more, like the Eastern churches kind of saw this and split away, partially for that reason, but there are obviously other reasons as well. And then eventually in Vatican I, like the Pope gets this idea of this concept of papal infallibility, which I just don't think is there. I'm not convinced by the arguments that was what Peter was told to do when he was told he's like the rock of the church and given the keys to the kingdom and stuff like that. Like, I don't think that is what Jesus was telling Peter to do, to be like this pope over all of the church. So yes, in a sense, Peter was the first pope in the sense that he was potentially the first bishop of Rome, which I don't even know is necessarily true. I'll just taking the kind of the Catholic claim at face value. It's like, I guess, but then there's even questions of like sometimes this, like the question of like when these bishop lists were created, like these could have been created after the fact to justify the idea of a bishop of Rome, and to say that the bishop of Rome comes directly from Peter. Some of these were constructed after the fact later on, is at least my understanding of this. But I guess the main point is that just asking like a Protestant inability potentially to give a first pope, it doesn't really address the actual issue at hand, which is the idea that what the Pope actually is something that developed over time and turned into something that it wasn't initially supposed to be. And I think that's like one of the bigger problems with Catholicism in general. It's this binding of people to these doctrines that were nowhere to be found in Jesus' time. And I don't think that the Pope has the right to do that. That the authority of the Catholic Church has the right to do to bind people to just doctrines that are nowhere to be found in the Bible and in Jesus' ministry, and even in the early church, like all the Marian dogmas, especially, like those are nowhere to be found. Like especially the Assumption in particular. Some of the Marian dogmas I think are likely true. Like obviously, like the fact that she was a virgin when Jesus was born. I think her perpetual virginity, there's some compelling aspects to that. Though there's a lot of questions when it comes to our understanding of when the Bible refers to who like the brothers and sisters of Christ are, and like who exactly they were. Possibly Joseph's kids maybe, because there's questions about like, for example, I think Jesus has John, I think, take care of his mother after he's crucified, whereas like traditionally in Jewish culture it would have been one of Jesus's brothers if Mary had more kids. So it's shocking that Jesus didn't do that, didn't just have one of her other kids take care of her if Mary had other kids. But I think that gives some evidence that Mary didn't. But I think that one's more up for debate. So I think the idea that you can use this accreted idea of a pope who has authority over the whole church and is the vicar of Christ and stuff like that, using that as this means to enforce these non-essential doctrines where there is a lot of dispute over these, I just don't think that that's justified. I think there's also questions about like in vitro fertilization, like why is that condemned so aggressively? I don't know, but that's a whole other issue. That's starting to delve into politics, which I do want to avoid getting super into on this channel again. I think there's a lot of just I think delving into political discussions is a great opportunity to move away from Christ as the focus and focus on our own culture and our own egos and our own pride and our own like identities as a certain political ideology. And I think I've fallen into that a lot in the past on this channel, and I don't always agree with the way that I conducted myself or the approach that I had to certain things. Now my political views, I don't know if they've changed a ton. There's obviously some changes. I'm not an objectivist anymore, and I think Christianity is important in informing some things, though I don't go as far as I don't agree with Christians, I think, on all political issues. But I think that Christianity is important to inform those sort of things. But yeah, I want to avoid politics particularly on this channel because I just don't think it's a great realm to dive into when it comes to finding like good conversation that is filled with the fruit of the Spirit. Like the politics, it leads to these pointless arguments and this pointless virtue signaling and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, let me and I also think a lot of these issues can lead us in a place where we are applying the culture to Christianity and applying what our culture thinks and our culture paradigms. And I'm saying this is a critique of both sides, so don't even try to guess my views based on the things that I'm saying. But I think it can lead to us applying our culture and the paradigm and the types of things that we debate can influence our Christianity more than our Christianity and love and fruit of the Spirit and all of this sort of stuff influences our politics. There's so much hatred and division and all this stuff within our political framework that I think we really need to find a way to overcome and really put Christ at the center of. But yeah, so that's my current thoughts on like politics and why I want to avoid that on this channel more so. I also just don't like the way that I would present myself when I was talking about politics. It was very much more just like steeped in like irony and just offensive jokes and just dumb childish things like that. And I think a lot of like the political YouTube scene is kind of steeped in that. Like I used to really like some of these guys, like I used to really like Destiny and Vosh, but obviously I've gone a very different direction from them. I think a lot of stuff that they have done after I've like since I last posted on this channel is not great. And I stopped watching both of them a little bit before each of those times as well, just because I realized that a lot of this stuff isn't that helpful for my own formation as a person and for my own like understanding of the world and my own like just mental health and just like the way I look at other people. Destiny has definitely gone off the deep end. I agree. I think it's weird how I never noticed it in the past, because he was always like very deeply involved in like drugs and like sexual promiscuity and all that sort of stuff. And I liked his politics, which I think is what kept drawing me back to him. And I think also at the time I was a lot more like him, like with like doing drugs and with having a very like lax attitude towards my own personal like sexual ethics and stuff like that. So I think I wasn't as turned off by that in the past, but I can see where that stuff leads, and it never leads to a good place. He would always pride himself on being immune to controversy and immune to stuff like that, but really lately with the stuff that's been coming out about him and his history with this stuff is not great. I also remember at one point when I was an atheist and watching him a lot, I remember there was this one interview that he had where he was talking with some Christian, and just the way he was arguing, like normally I was like very impressed by his argumentative style and like the points that he was making, but in this particular debate, like he was not making great points, but he was emphasizing them and like kind of like mocking. It was more of like he was mocking the Christian for believing the things and using that as an argument to convince, rather than actually engaging with the points and engaging with the arguments. Whereas the Christian was just talking like normal, but like Destiny was out here like talking about like, oh, you really think your Jesus is gonna come back? When is he coming back? Is he back yet? Like just like the mocking, which is not a it wasn't a great look, and I it made me question like why, like if he doesn't have great arguments, like he didn't have good arguments against God in that particular sense, so why is he so adamantly atheist? And yeah, I don't know. That's the question that I guess we all have to kind of ask about, like modern atheists. They're very, very passionate. There's this intense passion for their atheism, for their belief in nothing. But it makes you wonder why they're doing that, why they care so much, and why, especially when the arguments aren't great. Like I feel like even when I became atheist, like I had my objectivist phase for a while, but ultimately the passion kind of faded from that. Like I wasn't as passionate about continuing to dive deep into objectivism and continuing to learn about Ayn Rand. Like I really enjoyed her philosophy and I learned a lot from it, but I felt it didn't really address my needs, and it cultivated a passion at first, but that passion was ultimately lacking. Was ultimately, what's the word that I'm looking for? Transient, maybe? I don't know if I'm using that word right. Temporary. Lasting for only a short time. So yeah, transient. Like it was this sort of transient passion that I found to be lacking. Oh, what up, Charles? How's it going? Yeah, the stream's gonna probably come to an end relatively soon, so you came a little bit late, but yeah, nice seeing you here. So I got to get back to work at 1, but it's been cool just chatting with you guys a little bit. Yeah, different crowd here today than there was last month, which is cool. So I definitely want to keep doing this. It's a lot less formal than some of my videos, so hopefully like you guys can keep up with my rambling and enjoyed it. But yeah, I should respond to the last point. The point about Destiny, just him being consistent for what that's worth. I think he tries to be consistent, but I think a lot of times people who are good at arguing and framing a question can appear more consistent than they are. But you might be talking about his abortion debates potentially, or just the debates that you might have seen between him and Christians. He tends to take his consistency. He tends to pride himself on consistency, but I think sometimes there's issues. When you can argue well, I think you can appear more consistent than you truly are. Yeah, I think I'll put a pin in that because I don't know if I want to dive super deeply into politics. But it's interesting the directions that we go with things on this. I think I was just talking about like baptism and the Lord's Supper and stuff, and somehow we end up talking about like politics and Destiny, which is cool for a cool for the live stream format because I really can't plan where things are gonna go. Yeah, I enjoy this. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope I'm not too like disconnected and rambling, but yeah, I feel good. I feel like this was a good stream. I really do thank you guys for watching. I really enjoy streaming and have really enjoyed getting back to this YouTube channel. It's given me a lot more passion and just desire to dive deep into the Word of God and to really try to understand theology better. Because I'm not the most knowledgeable now. I'm not an expert on this stuff, but this has given me a good, like, great opportunity to like writing these scripts, the amount of connections that I can make in the Bible and like just learning like where certain verses are. Like I have these favorite verses that I can like point to, and like Genesis 1:27 that we're made in the image of God. That's super helpful. Or I guess like what's like what I did earlier where I pulled up like 1 Corinthians 11, the 1 Corinthians 11:27, when we're talking about the Lord's Supper is a super helpful verse, or John 6:53 or something like, or 51 through 66. Yeah, those verses tend to like, all that stuff is good. Rats, I missed it. How much do you bench now? I'm not at 315 yet. This is the sad news that I will end with. Yeah, I am not quite at 3 plates yet, sadly, but we're getting there. We are getting there. I actually took a break from lifting for a while because I did a half marathon last Sunday, not this Sunday, the Sunday before, so May 4th. I did a half marathon, so I took a little bit of a break from lifting. So I think my bench probably went down a little bit, but I would like to get to 315 by the end of the year. I think we will. I think we can still do it. Yeah, because I renewed my gym, or got another year on my gym membership, and I'm hoping to start going more consistently. Yeah, I kind of used last week recover from the half marathon, and then we're getting there. I think the highest that I've benched this year was like 295, maybe 285. That was like a couple months ago, though. That was before I really got started intensely training for my marathon, and I definitely lost, or half marathon, and I definitely lost weight during that half marathon. But I did surprisingly well. I was really proud of myself because I got 2 hours and 8 minutes, which is under 10-minute mile pace. 2 hours 8 minutes, great time. It's actually 30 seconds above 8 minutes, so I might be lying, but yeah. Oh wow, 225 by 13. That's nice. That's good. Switching to mostly incline. Yeah, I feel like at times you need to sometimes switch to do a different angle or a different perspective, because you need to shock the muscle sometimes, because that's how you can really get stronger. Because at some point, I don't know, it feels like when you just kind of do the same motions over and over again, you don't get a sore after, if you do the same lifts, which really probably means you're probably not really working the muscles as much as you want to. I think shocking the muscles is very important. Training for a shot put and discus meet. That's exciting. I did discus in middle school for a little bit. Yeah, it was a good time. I really enjoyed discus. But okay, we're already 2 minutes over, so I should get back to work. I technically started the stream a little bit late, so I'm still under an hour of streaming, so not technically going over an hour for lunch, but I should probably get back to work. But thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.